Okay, today we are going to just do more of the same of solving polynomial equations. As you might have noticed, some of the directions have been slightly different. When we have equations that are quadratics or any polynomials of that sort, we can also ask the question, find the zeros of the equation below, find the roots, find the solutions, or solve the equation. We can also talk about it as x-intercepts, and we'll get into a little bit more about that next week. But essentially, when you have an equation, even if it's a linear equation, where it crosses this x-axis is called a zero or a root. That's the zero. It's where the y value is 0, or it's an x-intercept. So that's kind of why we can do that. When we get into these quadratic equations, you'll notice that we have more of a curve or a U-shaped graph, and that's why we have two possible solutions, because we will cross that axis twice. Okay, so just as we get into that next week, kind of just be aware that the words zeros, roots, and solutions are generally the same thing, asking you to set the equation equal to 0, factor, and then set the factors equal to 0. So if I look at number 1, again, my goal is to set that equal to 0, which would be step 1. So I'm going to need to move that 3x to the other side. When I subtract it to the other side, I'm left with 3x squared minus 3x equals 0. So that was step 1. Step 2 is to then ask yourself if that is factored. If not, you need to factor it. This is not factored, so I need to ask myself if there's a greatest common factor. So remember, the first thing we look at is there a variable in all terms? And there is a variable in all terms. There's an x, okay? And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at the numbers and see if I can take out a 3. I can take out a 3 from both terms, so I'm going to write this 3 outside here. So I'm going to divide out of both of these terms a 3x, or undistribute, or pull out. So 3x squared divided by 3x is just x, because 3 divided by 3 is 1, x squared divided by x is x. And 3x divided by 3x is 1. So I have x minus 1. Then I need to set each factor equal to 0. One factor is 3x, the other factor is x minus 1. So I'm going to set 3x equal to 0, and I'm going to set x minus 1 equal to 0. I'm going to get for my two solutions x equals 0 and x equals 1. And number 2, I need to set this also equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and move the 8x over to the other side, and I'm also going to move the 10. I'm going to combine the 10 with the 5 because those are like terms. So I'm going to end up with x squared minus 8x plus 15 equal to 0. Now that I'm in standard form, I'm going to take the next step, which is factoring. I do not have a greatest common factor. There is not an x in all 3 terms, and there's no other number besides 1 that can be divided evenly from all 3 terms. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my 2 binomial parentheses. I know that these first 2 spots have to multiply to x squared, so I have x and x. I know that this spot times this spot needs to be 15, so I'm going to start with 5 and 3 and see if that works. When I check that, x times x is x squared. X times 3 is 3x, 5 times x is 5x, and 5 times 3 is 15. My goal is to get this 3x and 5x to be negative 8, and that would be possible if they were both negative. The only thing I need to double check is that that last term, that constant term, is positive 15, and if I do negative 5 times 3, I do get positive 15. So I have factored it correctly. I am now going to set both terms equal to 0. When I set x minus 5 equal to 0, I get x equals 5. When I set x minus 3 equal to 0, I get x equals 3. Number 3. So the first question we ask ourselves is it set equal to 0? And it is. And the next question we ask ourselves is it factored? And lucky me, this one is already factored. So please don't go multiply. We don't need to multiply. We're already 2 steps done. Think about it. From here, we set it equal to 0, then we factored. I'm already factored, so I already have these factors. So I'm going to set all 3 equal to 0. Okay, when I set 4 equal to 0, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't have a variable, okay? So I have x minus 2 equals 0 and 3x minus 7 equals 0. This one's going to give me 2. This one I need to add 7. After I add 7, I get 3x equals 7, and I need to divide by 3, and we can just leave it as 7/3. We do not want to write that as a decimal, because it'll be a repeating decimal. Number 4, it would probably be wise to move this negative 6x squared to the other side. That way I don't have to deal with a negative. So I'm going to move this 6x squared to the other side, and I'm going to move that 14x to the other side. And it doesn't matter which side we write the 0 on. So 0 equals 6x squared minus 14x plus 4. And then that next step would be to ask if I have a greatest common factor. I do have a greatest common factor of 2. When I take out a 2, I'm left with 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. So my goal here is to see if I can factor it further. So I'm going to try 3x and x, and then I know I need to do 2 and 1, okay, because that's my only option. I also know, because this is minus, that both of these are going to be minus. So I'm going to go ahead and try this and make sure it works. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times negative 2 is negative 6x. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x, and then I have plus 2. Which when I combine those give me that, so I am good to go. So I am now going to just set each term equal to 0. I have a 2, I have the 3x minus 1, and I have the x minus 2. When I set 2 equal to 0, that doesn't mean anything. There's no variable, there's no solution there for that. 3x minus 1, I'm going to add the 1. I get 3x equals 1. And if I divide by 3, I get 1/3. And I'm going to set x minus 2 equal to 0. When I add 2, I get 2. So one answer is 2 and one answer is 1/3.